People in the small mountain village had many stories, but the one they feared the most was about a woman they called the Vampire Queen. No one knew how the name started or who first whispered it, but the title stayed, and over years it became something people didn't even question anymore. Parents used it to scare children into coming home early. Older people shook their heads whenever the forest got too quiet, as if the silence itself was a sign she was awake. Everyone agreed on one thing: whoever went near her territory never returned. And for that reason, the forest on the far side of the village remained untouched for decades. But fear is a strange thing. It grows bigger when people talk about it, and the villagers talked about her all the time. Some said she had glowing red eyes that could freeze a man's heart. Others claimed she moved without sound and could cross long distances in seconds. A few even said she fed on life itself, not just blood. No one had seen her closely, yet every person acted as if they knew everything about her. The stories kept changing, but the fear stayed the same. However, one person did not completely believe these tales. He grew up hearing the same stories as everyone else, but he noticed something people around him ignored. Whenever strange things happened, missing goats, cold winds, or unusual lights, everyone blamed her. It was easier to point fingers at a mysterious figure than to look for real explanations. He found that strange. How could a single person, living alone somewhere deep in the forest, be responsible for every odd thing that happened in the entire region? He had always been quiet, observant, and curious. While others avoided the forest, he often walked along its edge, studying the trees, the ground, and the path that led deeper inside. He noticed footprints, sometimes small and light, almost like someone barely touched the ground. They didn't look like monster footprints. They looked like a normal person's prints. He found symbols carved on rocks, too. Not dangerous symbols, not anything dark, more like markings someone used to guide themselves. Yet nobody cared to investigate. The villagers simply said, "She's leaving warnings. Don't follow them." He wondered if she was even alive. Maybe she was someone who had once lived there, and now only her legend remained. But every time he thought that, something new happened. Someone claimed they heard footsteps behind them at night, or someone saw a shadow moving unnaturally fast. It became almost impossible to separate truth from fear. And that made him more curious, not more scared. Whenever he asked the older villagers if anyone had tried to talk to her, they reacted with shock. Talk to her? They couldn't believe he even said it. They told him stories of brave hunters who marched into the forest and never returned. But no one ever mentioned seeing their bodies. No one mentioned hearing screams. They simply vanished, and people assumed the worst. He found it odd how easily people accepted the worst explanation without evidence. One evening, while sitting with a group of men near the village fire, he asked again, "But how do you know she's dangerous?" The men stared at him as if he had committed a sin. One man said, "Because fear doesn't come from nowhere." Another said, "When everyone believes something, it has to be true." And the third one simply shook his head, saying, "You don't go looking for trouble." It was clear no one wanted to think, question, or doubt. It was easier for them to live with fear than to search for truth. He couldn't blame them entirely. The forest did have a strange atmosphere. Even on warm days, the deeper areas remained cold. Birds didn't sing near the far side, and animals avoided it. The wind sometimes carried a sound that didn't belong to nature, a soft hum, almost like a breath. Anyone would find it unsettling. But unsettling did not always mean dangerous. That was the difference he understood, and the villagers refused to see. One afternoon, he walked closer to the forest than usual. The sky was pale, the air still. He stood at the boundary where the ground changed texture-soft forest soil meeting dry village earth. From this point on, no one dared to step forward. Even the bravest hunters avoided crossing it. He looked ahead, trying to see if there was anything unusual. Nothing moved. But something about the place felt alive, like the forest was watching him, waiting to see if he would cross. He took a deep breath and stepped back, not out of fear, but out of respect. He believed if she existed, if she truly lived somewhere inside, then the forest was her home. And he didn't want to enter without reason. Over the next few days, he found himself thinking about her more and more. He wondered what she looked like. Was she really pale with sharp eyes? Was she lonely? Did she watch people from the shadows, hearing all the things they accused her of? And if she wasn't what they thought, how hurt she must feel knowing people saw her as a monster. The turning point came on a night when the entire village was alert. A loud scream echoed from the forest. It didn't sound like an animal. It was too sharp, too desperate. People ran out of their homes, clutching lanterns. Mothers held their children. Men looked scared, but tried to act brave. Someone shouted, "She's angry tonight." Another whispered, "She's hunting." The young man listened carefully. The scream didn't feel like it belonged to a predator. It sounded like someone in pain. Maybe someone trapped, hurt, or frightened. But the villagers didn't care. Their fear took over instantly. A group of men decided to lock all doors and wait until morning. No one wanted to go near the forest. People looked at the young man as if waiting for him to also step back, hide, and follow the rules of fear. But he didn't. He felt something inside him stir. He couldn't stand the idea of someone suffering alone in the cold forest, especially if the villagers' rumors were wrong. He knew that if he didn't go now, he would regret it forever. Something in that scream called him, not in a magical way, but in a human way. Without saying a word, he picked up a lantern and started walking toward the forest. People gasped. A few grabbed his arm, telling him he was throwing his life away. Someone shouted, "She will take you. Don't be foolish." But he gently pulled his arm back and continued walking. The villagers were frozen with fear. Some tried to talk him out of it, but no one dared to follow him. They stayed where they always stayed safe, inside the circle of fear they built for themselves. He stepped across the boundary. The air changed immediately. It felt cooler, heavier, like entering another world. The light of his lantern stretched long shadows across the trees. Every small sound felt louder under the branches. But he didn't turn back. His steps were slow but steady as he walked deeper. He noticed the forest wasn't as wild as people described. The trees were spaced evenly. The ground was clean, almost cared for. He saw markings again, this time clearer symbols carved into tree trunks, showing paths and directions. Someone lived here. Someone organized this place. It didn't look like the work of a monster. He kept moving until he reached a narrow passage between rocks. The scream had come from this direction. He paused, listening. The forest was silent, now too silent. But silence didn't scare him as much as the thought of turning back without answers. He stepped through the passage, lantern held high. A light breeze brushed his face, carrying a faint scent that was neither sweet nor foul, just natural. And then he felt it a presence. Not seen, not heard, but felt. As if someone was standing just out of sight, watching him with careful eyes. He spoke softly into the darkness, not sure who he was talking to. "I'm not here to harm you. I just want to understand." The forest remained quiet, but the heaviness in the air shifted. It no longer felt threatening. It felt curious. For the first time in decades, someone had dared to step toward the territory of the so-called vampire queen, and though he did not see her yet, she had seen him. She watched him from the shadows, surprised that a human had crossed the boundary without trembling, without weapons, without hate. And from that night onward, everything began to change. The young man had always been different from the rest of the villagers. While others followed fear like a rule book, he followed curiosity. That night, as he stepped deeper into the forest, he felt an unusual calm. The trees seemed taller, the air heavier, yet it was not frightening. He remembered the scream that had echoed through the village earlier, but he didn't feel panic. Instead, he felt a strange pull, a sense that something or someone needed help. Every step he took was careful, deliberate. He avoided making noise, not because he was afraid, but because he wanted to understand, to observe. Small creatures scurried away at his presence, and distant owls hooted softly. But the forest otherwise seemed alive in a quiet, watchful way. He noticed that the footprints he had been following earlier became more distinct, as if someone wanted him to see the way. It was a thought that made him hesitate for a moment. Was it a trap or a guide? He reminded himself that judging by fear alone was what the villagers always did, and he refused to fall into that same trap dot as he walked. His mind wandered to the stories he had grown up hearing. They spoke of a pale woman who could move like a shadow, whose eyes glowed red in the night, and whose power was said to be deadly. Most of the villagers swore by the stories as absolute truth, but he couldn't help thinking about the gaps. How could a single person in the forest be responsible for every misfortune in the surrounding area? How could no one ever see her face and live to tell the story? These questions had kept him awake for years. And now, for the first time, he was about to find answers. A faint path began to appear under the soft moonlight, and he followed it, stepping lightly over fallen branches. The air was colder now, and each breath formed little clouds. His lantern illuminated rocks and roots, casting strange, dancing shadows. He felt that same presence again, something unseen, watching him, weighing his intentions. He whispered softly, "I mean no harm. I just want to know the truth." Time passed slowly. The forest seemed endless, yet he moved with purpose, guided by his instincts and the subtle signs around him. At one point, he stopped to rest beside a large tree, noticing carvings that looked deliberate. Symbols, not threatening, but carefully etched, almost like someone had left messages for those willing to look closely. He studied them, trying to decipher their meaning. Were they warnings, directions, or simply marks left by someone living here? The thought that someone actually lived in the forest, separate from all rumors, gave him a strange comfort. Suddenly, a soft movement caught his attention. He turned his lantern carefully, and his heart skipped a beat. A figure stood a few meters away, partially hidden behind thick foliage. She was tall, pale, and her eyes seemed sharp, yet not unkind. The moonlight touched her hair, giving it a silver glow. For a moment, he froze. She did not move. She only observed, her expression unreadable. Most people, in that moment, would have run. Most people would have shouted or attacked, but he did neither. Instead, he lowered his lantern slightly, showing that he meant no harm. His voice was calm as he said, "I am not here to hurt you. I only want to understand." The figure tilted her head slightly, as if considering his words. Silence stretched between them, and he felt the weight of it. The villagers had told him for years that approaching her was certain death. But looking at her now, he could not see a monster. He could see someone cautious, wary, and perhaps even lonely. He noticed subtle signs of weariness in her stance. Her eyes, though sharp, carried a tiredness that no story had ever mentioned. For a long moment, neither spoke. He could sense her studying him, measuring his intentions. He realized then that fear, all powerful among people, did not exist between them in the same way. Here, in the quiet of the forest, it was respect, curiosity, and caution that ruled. Slowly, she stepped forward a little, no longer hiding entirely. He saw that she was not armed, not threatening. Her presence was commanding, yet fragile in a way that only those who were truly alone could see. He took another small step toward her, keeping his hands visible. He wanted to show that he trusted her. And in that step, something shifted. Her gaze softened, just slightly, enough that he felt a tiny crack in the wall of caution she had built around herself. He spoke again, gently. "I have heard stories about you all my life. Everyone fears you, but I don't. I think there is more to you than anyone realizes. I want to understand." Her lips moved slightly, forming words he couldn't hear at first. Then she spoke, her voice soft and almost melodic, carrying the weight of someone who had been unheard for years. "No one has ever approached me willingly. Not in a long time." He nodded, understanding. He didn't take offense at the caution in her tone. After all, if he had lived isolated for decades, misunderstood and feared, he would have been cautious too. He didn't want to rush her or break her trust. Instead, he offered patience, letting silence fill the space between them, allowing her to decide how much to reveal. Slowly, she stepped closer, her eyes still sharp but less wary. He could see the subtle signs of someone who had been living in solitude. Her clothes, though elegant, were worn. Her skin, pale as moonlight, carried a softness beneath the legends of horror. He realized then that every story he had ever heard was only a shadow of the truth, exaggerated by fear and imagination. Over the next few minutes, they exchanged few words, but it was enough to build the foundation of understanding. He learned that she had been in the forest for many years, avoiding the world outside. People had tried to find her in the past, attacking her home or attempting to trap her. Every attempt had failed, but the fear of the unknown had grown into legend. No one had bothered to see her as a person, only as a myth, and that had hurt her more than any attack ever could. He listened carefully, not interrupting, simply letting her speak. He understood that her story was not one of terror, but of survival and loneliness. She had adapted to live in a world that had rejected her, and in doing so, had become the vampire queen in the minds of those who feared what they did not understand. He realized that legends were easier to believe than truths, especially when the truth was complicated and uncomfortable. By now, he felt a strange sense of respect growing between them. He could see why she had remained hidden for so long, and he understood why fear had kept everyone else away. Yet he also knew that fear could be broken by courage, and that understanding could be built from a simple act of approaching rather than fleeing. She finally stepped fully into the moonlight, no longer partially hidden. He could see her face clearly, now sharp features softened by time, eyes that had seen pain and isolation, but still carried a spark of intelligence and curiosity. It was then he understood something important. She was not a creature of horror. She was a human being, shaped by circumstances, misunderstood by those who feared her. He spoke again, carefully choosing his words. "I don't fear you. I only want to know who you are. Not the stories, not the legends, but you. The real you." Her gaze held his for a long time. Then, slowly, a small smile appeared, one that seemed almost shy, yet relieved. "No one has ever said that to me," she admitted quietly. "Everyone comes to destroy or run. You are different." He nodded, understanding that his courage was not in facing her as a threat, but in seeing her as she was. That was enough to break the silence that had surrounded her for so long. For the first time in decades, she felt seen not as a legend, not as a monster, but as a person. And in that moment, the young man realized something he had not expected. Approaching her had not only opened a door to understanding her story, but also to changing how the villagers might see her in the future. He knew it would take time, but the first step had been taken. They stayed there for a while, neither rushing, neither fearing. He could feel the forest around them settling, as if it recognized the change in energy. The oppressive weight that once seemed to hang over this place felt lighter. The presence she carried, mysterious, powerful, and lonely, was still there, but now accompanied by a hint of trust. When he finally left that night, he did not rush back to the village. He walked slowly, letting the experience sink in. For the first time, he understood that courage was not about fighting monsters or ignoring danger. Courage was about approaching what others feared, seeing what others refused to see, and being willing to understand. Even when the world told you not to. By the time he returned to the village, the stars had moved across the sky. People were waiting for him, fear written across their faces. But he carried a calmness they could not understand. He had gone into the forest and returned, not harmed, not cursed, but enlightened. And he knew that this was only the beginning. That night, he made a promise to himself. He would continue to learn about her, not through stories or whispers, but by spending time observing and building trust. And in doing so, he hoped he could someday show the villagers that the Vampire Queen was not a monster, but a human being capable of thoughts, feelings, and stories far richer than anyone could imagine. The next day, the young man could hardly focus on anything. He walked through the village slowly, feeling the sunlight warm his face, but his mind was elsewhere. He kept thinking about the woman he had met the night before. She was unlike anything he had imagined. She was not the monster the villagers had described. She was real human, and full of mysteries that only someone brave enough to approach her could begin to understand. Everywhere he went, villagers whispered among themselves. They noticed he had stayed out late, and a few curious ones asked where he had been. He avoided their questions, pretending ignorance, because he was not ready to explain what had happened. How could he explain that he had met the so-called Vampire Queen and had not been harmed? How could he make them understand that she was not evil? Most of them would never believe him. It was easier for them to cling to fear than to face the truth. He spent the day planning his next trip into the forest. He knew he could not let the first meeting be their only encounter. If he wanted to understand her, if he wanted to see the real person behind the stories, he needed more time, more observation, and more patience. He also knew he had to be careful. While he did not fear her, the forest was still her home. Any disrespect could end their fragile connection before it had even begun. When night fell again, he prepared for the journey. He carried a small lantern, some food, and a notebook to record what he saw. He did not want to leave anything to memory alone. He wanted to remember her expression, her words, the way she moved, and the details of her home. Every small thing could tell him more about who she was and how she lived. As he entered the forest, the air changed immediately. It felt cooler, heavier, and quieter than the village. The sounds of nocturnal creatures seemed distant, as if the forest itself had grown still to watch him pass. He noticed the faint markings in the trees again, the same ones from the night before, and followed them carefully. They led him deeper, toward a small clearing where he had first seen her. He paused at the edge of the clearing, holding the lantern high. The moonlight fell softly, illuminating the space. At first, it seemed empty, but then he saw her. She was standing near a cluster of rocks, looking up at the stars. She did not move when he entered, as if expecting him, but not entirely sure what to make of him. He stepped forward slowly, keeping his hands visible. "Good evening," he said softly. "I hope I am not disturbing you." She turned her gaze toward him, her eyes reflecting the moonlight. There was no anger, no fear, only cautious curiosity. "You came again," she said, her voice steady but quiet. "Most humans would have run after the first night. Why are you different?" He smiled faintly, choosing his words with care. "I do not fear you. I want to understand. I want to know who you really are, not the stories people tell." She studied him for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. Few have ever spoken like that to me. Few have ever treated me as a person instead of a legend. You are brave. Or foolish. Perhaps both. He shook his head slightly. I do not think of myself as brave. I think of myself as curious. And I do not believe in legends unless I see the truth for myself. For the next few hours, they walked together through the small clearing. She did not guide him far into the forest, only enough to show him the areas she used for her home. The more he saw, the more he realized how much people had misunderstood her. Her home was not dark or dangerous. It was simple and practical. She had a small area for cooking, a place to rest, and signs that she took care of herself and her surroundings with great attention. He noticed small details, a carved bowl, carefully stacked firewood, and a small pile of herbs. None of it suggested danger. Instead, it suggested someone who lived alone for a long time, someone who had learned to survive quietly and independently. Every item spoke of patience, thought, and careful planning. It was a life shaped by solitude, not malice. As they moved through the clearing, he asked questions, but gently. He wanted to learn, not interrogate. How did you survive all these years? He asked. She looked away for a moment, as if considering how much to reveal. I learned to be cautious. People once tried to harm me, to chase me out. I had to find ways to protect myself. I stayed hidden. I watched. I waited. He nodded slowly. I understand. People often fear what they do not know. But you are not what they think. You are not a monster. Her lips curved slightly, a small, almost shy smile. No one has ever said that to me before. Most people shout, throw stones, or run. You are different. He felt a sense of relief. For the first time, she was opening up to him, even in small ways. He realized that building trust was not about rushing, but about patience, understanding, and showing respect for her space. The night passed with them talking quietly, sharing small stories about life, the forest, and the strange ways humans misunderstood one another. She told him about the animals she cared for, how she could track them silently, and how she learned to live without disturbing the balance of the forest. He listened, fascinated, realizing that she had skills and knowledge that few humans possessed. He also shared stories about the village, about ordinary life, about people who were kind and people who were cruel. She listened carefully, sometimes laughing softly, sometimes frowning at the cruelty humans could show. It was clear she had formed her opinions about humans from what she had seen and experienced in the past. His presence, patient and kind, challenged those opinions in a way no one else had ever done. At one point, she stopped and looked directly at him. Why do you risk yourself to come here? She asked. He thought carefully. Because someone needs to see the truth. Someone needs to understand you as a person, not a story. I believe that the world can change when people see what is real, not what they fear. She seemed surprised by his answer. Most humans only see what they want to see. They fear the unknown. They spread lies to protect themselves. You are not like them. He smiled. I am only human. But humans can choose differently if they try. For the first time, she seemed to relax. The tension in her posture softened, and her eyes held a warmth that had been absent before. He realized that their meeting was more than just curiosity. It was the beginning of something that could change both their lives. Hours passed, and the night deepened. The young man noticed the stars reflected in her eyes, and he felt a strange connection, growing a bond formed not by magic, but by trust, patience, and understanding. He understood that she had been alone for a long time, that no one had ever approached her without fear or malice. And he also realized that he could be the first human who truly saw her for who she was. Before leaving, he promised her something quietly. "I will return," he said. "I want to learn more. I want to understand everything about you, if you allow me." She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "If you return, I will not hide. But remember, curiosity alone does not guarantee safety. You must always respect my space." He agreed immediately, understanding that trust was fragile and could not be forced. "I will respect you, always." As he walked back to the village, he felt a mixture of excitement and calm. He had crossed a boundary that no one else dared to cross. He had met the so-called vampire queen, not as a monster, but as a person. And he knew that the next step would be even more challenging, building a relationship that could slowly change the way the villagers saw her. The forest behind him seemed quieter than before, yet not empty. He sensed her presence watching, curious and cautious. And he realized that this night, like the last, was only the beginning of a story far larger than either of them had imagined. A story about trust, courage, and the human heart's ability to see beyond fear, by the time he returned to his small home. The sky was starting to turn pale with the approaching dawn. The village was still asleep, unaware of the connection that had been forged in the forest that night. He sat quietly, thinking about her words, her movements, and her presence. He knew that the path ahead would be difficult, that not everyone would understand, and that fear would always lurk in the minds of those around him. But he also knew that he had made the first step towards something extraordinary. For the first time, the vampire queen had met a human who walked toward her, not away. And he had no intention of turning back. The next time he returned to the forest, the air felt different. It wasn't just the cool breeze or the soft rustling of the leaves. It was something deeper, like the forest itself recognized his presence. The young man moved carefully, carrying his small lantern and a few supplies. He had grown used to walking through the forest at night, but he never stopped being cautious. He had learned from his first meetings that this place was not dangerous because of her, but because it was unfamiliar. Respect, he realized, was the key to trust. When he reached the clearing where they usually met, she was already there, waiting. She stood silently, her eyes scanning the trees around them before settling on him. For a moment, she said nothing. Then quietly, almost as if speaking to herself, she said, "You always come back." "Why?" He lowered the lantern slightly. "Because you let me see the truth. You let me see you. Most people never have that chance. I want to understand everything about you, if you allow it." She studied him for a long moment. Her expression was unreadable, but there was a softness in her eyes he had not seen before. Slowly, she motioned for him to sit on a rock nearby. "Very well," she said. "If you truly want to know, I will tell you. But you must promise not to judge me." "I promise," he said, his voice steady. "I will not judge you. I only want to listen." She took a deep breath and began her story. She told him that she had not always lived in the forest. Once she had been part of a small town, much like the village she came from. People there had known her as a quiet, intelligent, and skilled young woman. But when misfortune struck the town, illness, accidents, and misunderstandings, people began to look for someone to blame. She became their target. They saw her as different, as separate from them. And as fear grew, so did the stories about her. He listened carefully, imagining what it must have been like for someone to be blamed for everything that went wrong. She told him that the fear had escalated slowly at first, with whispers and cautious glances, then with anger and attempts to push her out. Every attempt to confront her forced her to flee further into isolation. Each time she moved, the stories followed her, growing taller with exaggeration, until she became the vampire queen in legend. Though in truth she had done nothing to harm anyone, He could feel her pain as she spoke. It was not just about isolation, but about being misunderstood, being feared for what she could not control. He realized that the legends had turned her life into a prison. She had learned to survive in solitude, avoiding people to protect herself, and in doing so, the stories of danger and evil grew even more powerful. She showed him the marks in the forest, the carvings on the trees, the small clearings she had prepared. "These are my warnings," she explained. "Not to scare, but to guide. I cannot trust people to leave me alone. Most do not respect boundaries. They come with fear, with anger. They come to destroy what they do not understand." He nodded slowly, understanding. The villagers believe the stories, just like everyone else. They do not know the truth because no one has ever taken the time to see it. She looked at him, a hint of surprise in her eyes. "And yet you came willingly. You did not carry fear, or weapons, or hate. You came with curiosity. That is rare." He smiled faintly. "I believe people are more than the fears that others project onto them. You are not what they think, and I want to see that clearly. That is why I came back." Her expression softened further, and for the first time, he saw a vulnerability that went beyond loneliness. "You do not know what it is like to be hunted by rumors," she said quietly. "To be feared simply because of circumstances beyond your control. To be seen as evil when all you want is to live in peace. Humans, they can be cruel when they do not understand. That is why I hid." He listened intently, feeling the weight of her words. He understood then that her so-called powers, the glowing eyes, the shadows moving without sound, had not been magic or malice. They had been survival. She had learned to move carefully, to avoid attention, to protect herself from a world that had turned against her. What the villagers saw as terrifying was in fact the product of years of solitude, caution, and necessity. "I understand," he said finally, his voice calm but full of empathy. "You did what you had to do to survive. You were misunderstood, and people's fear became stories. That is not your fault. The truth is yours to live, not theirs to invent." She studied him for a long moment, and then her eyes softened further. "You speak as if you know all of this easily. But do you? Do you understand what it feels like to be alone for decades? To have no one who truly sees you? You think you understand, but no one truly can. Except perhaps someone who chooses to stay." He did not hesitate. "I may not know exactly how it feels, but I can choose to be here. I can choose to listen, to respect, and to see the truth with my own eyes. That is all I can do, and I choose to do it." She looked at him, and for a moment, he thought he saw a flicker of hope in her expression. The years of fear and isolation had built walls around her, walls that no one had been able to penetrate. But he was slowly chipping away at them, not with force or argument, but with patience, understanding, and courage. Then she took him deeper into her clearing, to a small area he had not seen before. It was simple, yet carefully arranged. There were herbs drying in the moonlight, a small water source nearby, and signs that she maintained everything meticulously. "This is how I survive," she said quietly. "Not because I want to frighten anyone, but because I must be careful. One mistake, one careless encounter, and everything could be ruined. You understand that, do you not?" He nodded. "I do. I see your care, your thought, your caution. It is not fear, it is wisdom. You have adapted to survive in a world that misunderstands you." She looked at him thoughtfully. "And yet, despite all this, you approach me again. Why? Most humans never come this close. Most would leave or attack or spread rumors. You risk everything simply by being here." He smiled faintly. "I do not see it as risk. I see it as opportunity. An opportunity to learn, to understand, and to show others that truth is often hidden behind fear. You are not a monster. You are a person who has been judged unfairly. That is why I come. For the first time, she allowed herself a genuine smile, one that carried relief, gratitude, and something like trust. You are unlike anyone I have ever met. You do not see me through stories or rumors. You see me as I am. That is rare indeed. They spent the rest of the night talking quietly, sharing thoughts about the world, about the forest, and about the misunderstandings that people carried with them. She told him small details about her life, how she had learned to track animals silently, how she gathered herbs for healing, and how she maintained balance in her environment without harming it. He listened carefully, fascinated by the skill, intelligence, and humanity in her words. He realized that the so-called vampire queen was not only surviving, she was thriving in her own way. She had adapted to a life of solitude, protecting herself with caution, patience, and wisdom. What people feared as dangerous was in fact remarkable skill and intelligence. Before he left that night, he promised her quietly, "I will return. I want to learn more. I want to understand everything about you, if you allow me." She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "If you return, I will not hide. But remember, understanding takes time. Trust is not given lightly. You must always respect my space. I will respect you." "Always," he said as he walked back toward the village. The first rays of dawn were appearing over the mountains. The village was still asleep, unaware of the connection that had been forged in the forest that night. He reflected on everything she had told him. He understood now that the fear people carried was not based on truth, but on ignorance. He also understood that the next steps would be even more important, showing her story to the world in a way that could begin to break the myths that had haunted her for so long. The forest behind him seemed alive, yet not threatening. He sensed her presence, watching carefully, curious but cautious. And he realized that the story they were beginning to write together was one of understanding, empathy, and the slow dismantling of fear. For the first time, he understood the true challenge, not just seeing her for who she was, but helping others to see her that way too. And he knew that he was ready to face that challenge one step at a time. The young man returned to the forest as he had promised, carrying a small lantern and a bundle of food. He had grown more comfortable walking through the trees, listening to the soft sounds of the night and feeling the rhythm of the forest around him. Every step he took felt purposeful, and yet he remained cautious, knowing that this was her home and he was a guest. He knew the villagers would never understand why he came back, but he also knew that understanding her required patience and respect. When he arrived at the familiar clearing, she was waiting, standing silently beneath the silver glow of the moonlight. Her posture was cautious, but less rigid than before. It was as if she had been waiting for him, expecting his presence, yet still unsure of what to make of him. He approached slowly, careful not to startle her. "Good evening," he said softly. "I brought something to eat. I thought you might like some company tonight." She studied him for a moment, then allowed a small nod. "You are still different," she said. "Most humans would never do this. Most would leave or fear or attack. You choose to come back." He smiled faintly. "Because you let me see the truth. You let me see the real you, and I want to learn more. I want to understand everything about you." For the first time, she seemed to relax slightly. She gestured for him to sit nearby, and they shared a quiet meal. He noticed the care she had taken in arranging her small clearing simple tools, neatly stacked firewood, and herbs drying in the moonlight. Every detail told a story of someone who had lived in isolation for a long time, someone who had learned to survive quietly and efficiently. It was a life of skill, patience, and intelligence. Not the malicious legend the villagers had created. As they ate, he began to ask questions, gently and respectfully. How do you manage everything by yourself? He asked. She looked down for a moment before answering. I have learned to adapt. I cannot rely on anyone. I cannot trust easily. So I observe, I plan, and I protect myself. Most humans would not survive like this. Most would give up. Most would be frightened into hiding. He nodded, understanding. But you have survived, and you have thrived. That is incredible. You are stronger than anyone could imagine, and people have no idea. Her lips curved slightly, a small smile that seemed almost shy. No one ever notices. People only see the legend, the fear, the stories. They do not see the person behind it. That is why I stay hidden. He listened, absorbing every word. He realized that the fear surrounding her was not just about misunderstanding. It was about the way humans fear what they cannot control. Her solitude had become a symbol of that fear, and the legend of the vampire queen had grown from ignorance and imagination. But here, in the quiet clearing, he could see the real person, and he wanted others to see her that way too. Over the next few hours, they talked about small things, the forest, the animals, the changing seasons, and the way the wind moved through the trees. She shared stories of the creatures she cared for, how she could track them without disturbing the balance of the forest, and how she had learned to live without harming anything unnecessarily. He listened, fascinated by her knowledge and respect for life. He also shared stories of the village, of people who were kind and people who were cruel, of traditions and celebrations. She listened carefully, sometimes laughing softly at the simplicity of village life, sometimes frowning at the cruelty humans could show. He realized that her opinions about humans had been shaped by fear and betrayal, and his presence challenged those opinions gently. Without force. At one point, she stopped and looked directly at him. You come here willingly, knowing the stories, knowing the fear. You are not afraid. Why do you risk yourself like this? He thought for a moment. I do not see it as risk. I see it as opportunity. An opportunity to learn, to understand, and to show others that truth is often hidden behind fear. You are not a monster. You are a person who has been judged unfairly. That is why I come. She studied him for a long moment, and he could see a flicker of something she had not shown before: trust, perhaps, or relief. Few humans see like that, she said quietly. Most only see what they want to see. You are different. He nodded, understanding. I am not perfect. I make mistakes. But I choose to see you as you are, not as the stories describe. That is all I can do. She smiled then, fully, without reservation. It was a rare expression, one that carried relief, gratitude, and something like hope. He realized that their bond was growing, built not on fear, legend, or magic, but on trust, patience, and shared understanding. As the night went on, he noticed that her movements were becoming less cautious. She led him to a part of the clearing he had not seen before: a small stream, clear and shallow, with stones arranged carefully along the edges. This is my water, she explained. I keep it clean. I use it carefully. Every part of this forest has a purpose, a balance. I maintain it. He nodded, impressed. You are not only surviving, but thriving. You have learned to live in harmony with the forest, and yet people fear you. Her eyes softened. Yes, people fear what they do not understand. And so they create stories, legends, lies. It is easier than facing the truth. He looked at her thoughtfully. Then it is up to someone like me to see the truth and show it to others. Not with force, not with argument, but by understanding and sharing what is real. She seemed to consider this, then nodded slowly. Perhaps, but it will take time. People are slow to change. Fear runs deep. You may not succeed easily. I know, he said, but I am willing to try. You have shown me that courage is not always about fighting. Sometimes it is about seeing, understanding, and choosing to act with respect and honesty. For the first time, she seemed truly at ease. She spoke about her life in the forest with honesty, sharing moments of loneliness, challenges, and small victories. He listened carefully, realizing that each story she told was a piece of her life that had been lost to fear and misunderstanding. By listening, he was helping her reclaim her story. Piece by piece, as the night deepened, he noticed how much he had learned, not just about her, but about patience, trust, and empathy. He realized that their bond was growing stronger with each meeting. They had formed a connection built on respect, courage, and the human desire to understand rather than fear. Before leaving, he promised her quietly, "I will return. I want to continue learning, to understand everything about you, if you allow me." She looked at him for a long moment, and nodded. "If you return, I will not hide. But remember, trust is fragile. Respect it always." "I will respect you. Always," he said when he walked back toward the village. The first hints of dawn were touching the mountaintops. The villagers were still asleep, unaware of the connection that had been forged in the forest that night. He reflected on everything she had shared. He understood now that fear had created the legend, that isolation had turned her life into a story people misunderstood, and that patience and courage were the keys to building trust. The forest behind him seemed alive, watching but not threatening. He sensed her presence, curious and cautious. He knew that their bond was no longer fragile. It was growing stronger, built on the understanding that humans and legends were often very different. He also knew that this was only the beginning. The villagers would start noticing his absence, and rumors would begin again. But he had made a choice. He had chosen to see her truthfully, to respect her, and to help change the story, one step at a time. That night, he learned something important. Bonds are not formed through fear, but through patience, trust, and courage. And he knew that their story, his story with her, would be one of the few that could challenge fear with understanding, legend with truth, and isolation with connection. As he returned to his home, the sky brightened with the morning sun. He knew that soon the villagers would talk, they would speculate, and they would fear what they did not understand. But he also knew that the first steps had been taken. He had entered her world, learned her story, and formed a bond that could survive the ignorance and fear of others. And for the first time, he felt hope, not just for her, but for the possibility that the truth could be seen, the fear could be overcome, and the legend could be replaced by understanding. The following night, the young man returned to the forest, feeling a mixture of anticipation and caution. He had grown accustomed to the path, the rhythm of the forest, and the quiet presence that seemed to watch him as he walked. Every step was deliberate, respectful, and filled with purpose. This night felt different, though he sensed a change in the air, a tension that had not been there before. When he arrived at the familiar clearing, she was already waiting. Her eyes, sharp yet calm, met his immediately. There was a subtle hesitation in her posture, as if she too felt the shift in the forest. She had grown used to his visits, to his calm presence. But tonight there was something more pressing in the air. "You came," she said softly, her voice carrying both relief and concern. "I did," he replied. "I wanted to see you. I wanted to make sure you were safe." Her eyes flickered briefly, a mixture of gratitude and worry. "Safe in this forest? I have always been cautious. But now there may be others coming. I have sensed their fear, their curiosity. They may try to find me tonight." He frowned, realizing the weight of her words. The villagers had begun to notice his absences, and whispers had spread through the village. Someone must have told stories of his nighttime walks, of the forest, and of the mysterious figure he had spoken about so cautiously. Fear, he knew, had a way of multiplying when stories were involved. "I understand," he said calmly. "But they cannot stop the truth. We cannot hide forever, and fear cannot rule everything. I will stand with you." For a moment, she simply studied him, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Very well. But you must remember, this is my home. You are a guest. Others do not understand. You must be careful." He nodded in agreement. "I will be careful. I will respect you and your space. That is all I can promise." As they moved deeper into the clearing, the sounds of the forest seemed louder, sharper. The rustling of leaves, the distant cries of nocturnal creatures, and the subtle snap of twigs all made the young man aware that they were not entirely alone. His instincts told him that the villagers, curious and fearful, were venturing closer. Perhaps some would see him, perhaps some would see her, and the encounter could change everything. "Do they come often?" he asked quietly. "Sometimes," she replied. "When fear grows, people come looking. Some are cautious, some are reckless. I have learned to hide, to move silently, and to observe. But you walk toward me. That is unusual." He smiled faintly. "Because I want to understand, not to fear. I want to know the truth, not the stories." She studied him, her eyes reflecting the moonlight. "Then you are different. Few humans are like that." For hours, they moved through her small home in the forest, sharing stories and observing the quiet life she had built. She spoke of the years she had spent alone, of how she had learned to survive, how she had protected the animals, how she had maintained balance in the forest. He listened intently, fascinated not just by her skills, but by her resilience and patience. Every word revealed a person far more complex and human than the legends had described. But as the night deepened, a faint sound caught his attention. From the edge of the clearing, he heard voices hesitant, nervous, and tinged with fear. He recognized the cadence immediately. Villagers. Some had followed him, some had gathered out of curiosity or worry. The young man felt a surge of tension, but did not panic. "They are here," he whispered. She looked toward the sound, her eyes narrowing. "I feared this night would come," she said softly. "I have stayed hidden for so long, and now they come." He placed a reassuring hand lightly on his side. "Then let them see the truth, not the story. I will be with you. You are not alone." For the first time, she hesitated. Her gaze flicked toward the trees, then back at him. "They will be afraid. They may try to harm you. Or me. I know," he said calmly. "But fear cannot dictate everything. If they see us, and if they see that you are not a monster, the truth will speak louder than legend." The voices grew closer, and soon the first villagers emerged into the clearing. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide with fear and curiosity. They had come expecting a monster, a shadow, something to frighten them, and instead, they saw a young man standing calmly beside a tall, pale woman with sharp yet calm eyes. The villagers froze. Some whispered, some stepped back, unsure whether to flee or confront. The young man raised his hand slightly in a gesture of peace. "Do not be afraid," he said softly. "She is not what you think. She is not a monster. She is a person. You have heard stories, but the stories are lies. She has lived in solitude to survive, nothing more." For a long moment, silence fell over the clearing. The villagers looked at her, expecting to see something terrifying. Instead, They saw a person tall, quiet, and cautious, but human. She did not attack. She did not hiss. She simply stood there, observing, her eyes calm yet wary. One of the braver villagers stepped forward. "Is it true?" he asked nervously. "Are the stories lies?" The young man nodded. "Yes, they are exaggerations and fears passed down. She is not dangerous. She has lived alone, yes, but she has harmed no one. What you see as a legend is in fact a life of patience, skill, and survival." She finally spoke, her voice soft but clear. "I have lived in this forest to protect myself. I have not sought to harm anyone. I have only sought to live in peace. I am not a monster. I am a person, just like you." The villagers shifted uncomfortably. Some looked at the ground, some at each other, unsure how to respond. Fear was a powerful thing, and it was not easy to let go of. But as the young man spoke and she explained her story, the truth began to take root. Another villager, a woman, stepped forward hesitantly. We did not know," she said softly. "We only heard the stories. We thought you were dangerous." She nodded slowly. "I understand. People fear what they do not know. That fear became stories. But the truth is simple. I want to live in peace, and I do not wish harm upon anyone." The villagers were quiet, processing what they had just heard. The young man looked around at their faces and saw the change: hesitation, then understanding, then the beginnings of acceptance. It would take time for all fear to vanish, but the first step had been taken. He turned to her and smiled faintly. "See? Truth is stronger than fear when it is shared. You are not alone anymore." She studied him, her eyes softening with gratitude. You have done something no one has ever done. You have helped others see me as I am. That is more than anyone could hope for." The villagers began to speak more openly, asking questions not with fear, but with curiosity. She answered patiently, explaining her life, her skills, her solitude, and her desire for peace. The young man remained beside her, supporting her, helping the villagers understand without judgment or argument. By the time the night gave way to dawn, the clearing was filled with people not afraid, not hostile, but listening, learning, and beginning to understand. The legend of the Vampire Queen had been replaced, at least in part, by the truth. A woman who had lived alone, survived and thrived, who had been misunderstood for decades. She looked around at the villagers, then at the young man. This is more than I imagined," she said quietly. "You have changed everything tonight. Perhaps the stories will no longer control people's fear." He nodded. "The truth always has power, even if it is slow to spread. People will take time to adjust, but they will remember tonight. They will remember you as a person, not a legend." For the first time in decades, she felt hope not just for herself, but for the possibility of connection, understanding, and acceptance. She realized that fear had ruled her life for too long, and now, through patience, courage, and trust, the first barriers were falling as the villagers slowly returned to the village. Some still whispering, but now with a sense of wonder instead of fear. The young man and she remained in the clearing. The first rays of morning light touched the treetops, casting a soft glow over the forest. "I never thought this would happen," she said softly. "I never imagined people would listen, that fear could be replaced by understanding." He smiled. "It is only the beginning, but we have taken the first step. You are no longer alone, and soon the truth will reach further than the stories ever could." She nodded, a quiet strength in her expression. "Then let us continue. Let us show them the truth, one step at a time." And in that moment, the forest felt lighter, freer, as if it too recognized the change. The Vampire Queen was no longer a legend of fear. She was a person, seen and understood, and the young man who had dared to walk toward her had begun a journey that would change everything that night. A new chapter began not just for her, but for the villagers, for the forest, and for the truth that would no longer be silenced by fear.